You used military slang today. You probably did not realize it. If you told a colleague to stay on your six, you were borrowing from aviation tactics. If you said a project was going sideways, you were using language that originated in infantry maneuvers. If you called a chaotic situation a cluster, you were sanitizing a term that originally described a specific type of tactical failure, involving a very different word. The English language is saturated with military terminology. Most of it entered common usage so gradually that no one stopped to ask where it came from. There is a misconception that military slang exists to confuse civilians. The opposite is true. Military slang exists to create clarity under conditions where ordinary language fails. It is a technology of communication, developed in environments where hesitation or ambiguity can be lethal. And then, after the war's end, that language follows the soldiers home. The first major infusion of military language into American English happened after World War I. More than 2 million Americans served overseas. They returned with vocabulary shaped by the trenches, and they did not leave it behind. Take the word camouflage. Before the war, it did not exist in English. The French military had developed techniques to conceal artillery positions, and the term, derived from the French camoufler, meaning to disguise, came with the technique. By the 1920s, fashion magazines were using it to describe clothing patterns. Now it describes everything from corporate strategy to dating behavior. Or consider basket case. In the original usage, it was a military medical term from World War I. It referred to a soldier who had lost all 4 limbs and had to be carried in a basket. It was grim, specific, and clinical. By the 1930s, it had drifted into general use to describe anyone who was emotionally or physically incapacitated. The original meaning is almost entirely forgotten. World War II accelerated the process. The war was global, and it was total. Millions of Americans served, and millions more worked in defense industries. Military language entered the culture through newsreels, radio broadcasts, and the letters that families read aloud at dinner tables. The aviation community contributed some of the most enduring terms. SNAFU is the classic example. It began as an acronym among Army Air Forces personnel: Situation Normal, all fouled up. The acronym format allowed soldiers to acknowledge the chaos of military operations without sounding defeatist. After the war, SNAFU entered civilian usage as a polite way to describe any situation that had unraveled. Similarly, SCRAM was aviation slang for an emergency takeoff. If enemy aircraft were approaching, pilots were ordered to scramble. The word contracted to scram, and by the 1950s parents were telling children to scram from the dinner table. The Korean and Vietnam Wars added another layer. These conflicts introduced the American public to terms like boondocks and grunt. Boondocks actually came from the Tagalog word bundok, which means mountain. American soldiers stationed in the Philippines during the early 20th century started using it to describe remote rural areas. The word traveled to Korea and Vietnam, where it came to describe the dense, tough terrain soldiers faced. By the 1970s, anyone living outside a city was said to be in the boondocks. Now grunt is a more revealing case. It began as infantry slang. A grunt was the soldier who did the actual ground combat, the one carrying the weight, digging the holes, and slogging through the mud. The term was honestly self-deprecating. It acknowledged that infantry work wasn't glamorous. When the war ended, veterans brought the term home, and it became a label for anyone doing the unglamorous, essential work in any field. The grunt work of an office is the same as the grunt work of a patrol: necessary, repetitive, and rarely appreciated. The Cold War and the era of American military interventions introduced a different kind of linguistic contribution: the jargon of bureaucracy. Terms like situation report became sitrep, reconnaissance became recon, operations became ops. The military tendency to abbreviate wasn't about laziness, it was about efficiency. A radio transmission had to be short. A written order needed to be unambiguous. These abbreviations crossed over into civilian life as veterans entered corporate jobs. By the 1990s, business consultants were using sitreps and recon meetings. The language of military planning had become the language of business strategy. One of the most widely used military abbreviations is ETA, estimated time of arrival. It originated in the Army Air Forces during World War II. Flight planners needed a standardized way to communicate when aircraft would reach their targets. The term was precise, measurable, and left no room for interpretation. After the war, it migrated to commercial aviation, then to shipping, then to logistics. and now it even pops up in text messages about meeting friends for coffee. What makes ETA interesting is what it reveals about military influence. The term imposes a structure on time. It treats arrival as something that can be predicted, measured, and managed. That's a military mindset, the belief that chaos can be reduced to data. And honestly, that mindset has become so ordinary that no one really questions it anymore. The most recent wave of military slang entering civilian life comes from the fitness industry. Rucking, walking with a weighted backpack, has become a pretty popular civilian workout. The term comes directly from military training, where a ruck is a rucksack, and rucking is the act of marching with one. The military developed rucking as a low-impact way to build endurance and load-bearing capacity. Civilians have adopted it because, well, it works, and because the term carries a certain credibility. Similarly, battle rhythm has entered corporate language. In the military, battle rhythm refers to the predictable schedule of operations, meetings and reporting that keeps a unit functioning under pressure. In business, it means the same thing, a cadence that prevents chaos from taking over. The words we use carry the weight of where they came from. When you say stay on your six, you're using a term developed by fighter pilots who needed a way to communicate spatial awareness in 3 dimensions, at high speed, while someone was trying to shoot them down. When you say scram, you're using a word born from the urgency of getting aircraft off the ground before enemy bombers arrived. These terms didn't enter the language through marketing campaigns or dictionary committees. They entered because soldiers, sailors, and airmen brought them home and kept using them. The words survived because they worked. Language is a record of experience. The military slang in everyday English is a record of what happened when millions of Americans went to war and then returned to build a country that spoke differently than it had before. The words are small, but the history inside them is not. If you value history that goes deeper than the surface, subscribe to War Machiner. And if you found yourself surprised by a word you use every day, share this video. The language we speak is the history we carry.